Autism Quality of Life Podcast, Episode 16.
That is very different. The culture when that 67-year-old was 3 looked very different than the 3-year-old in 2017. And that's very positive because that's in some ways a great demonstration of a civil rights movement for an underserved population.
Welcome to another episode of the Autism Quality of Life Podcast. I'm so excited to share with you today's guest, who is Kylee Hope, the current director of the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services for the state of Indiana. So Kylee has a background in law and special education, and she came to her state position with a personal interest in developmental disabilities due to having a brother on the autism spectrum. Hi, Kylee.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Could you tell us some more about you and your connection to autism?
Yeah, sure. So as you indicated in your intro, I happen to have a brother who just happens to have autism. He is a 33-year-old, and he recently, actually, in the last 3 years, moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and that is, to put a perspective, that's 3 hours away from his hometown and my hometown as well, because he wanted to live as independently as he could. He wanted some different job options that maybe presented themselves in a more urban area rather than the rural area we're from. And so in this kind of odd transition, right, I transitioned into a director role here at the state as the division director for disability and rehabilitative services, as well as, I hate using maybe the word caregiver, but definitely a support network for my brother. And he lives with a roommate that also happens to have a disability, to make sure that they live the life that they want to live and have the supports that they have, and Kurt utilizes many of the services that I help implement here at the state as well.
So what is he doing now? Like, what does his life kind of look like?
He works part-time. He has 2 part-time jobs. One, he works at a hospital. Another, he works at a printing company. And he also lives on his own independently with a roommate. And he does receive some support services through a waiver. He utilized vocational rehabilitation services to get his job and maintain his job when he moved to Indianapolis. And you know what? He does a lot of things that he likes to do. So he loves going to baseball games. So he uses his money to go to baseball games with summer now upon us. Mm-hmm. He loves to walk on downtown. There's a canal, and he loves to walk on the canal. There's always activities downtown that he can participate in. So it's been a good transition for him. And I say that sometimes in the sense that I think people look at me and think, oh, well, that's easy. You may have had that information. You may have known what to do. And the reality is I didn't, and my family didn't. And there were failures, and there were problems, and there were things that we thought, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? At the end of the day, we listened to my brother, and he's happy, and he was excited to do this. This is what he wanted to do, even though it's, 3 hours away from my parents. And so it's been a great transition. I have a son, and so there's a great uncle and nephew relationship as well that you really can't beat. So that's fun.
Yeah. That must have been a rough transition for your parents, though. I mean, how did they handle that, having Kurt move away?
Sure. I'm sure it probably was a little rough. Maybe then afterwards they thought, well, this is kind of nice, to actually be empty nesters.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't like to speak for them, but I'm sure there's probably something in the back of their heads. They think, well, Kylee, do you really want to do, that support role or whatever? And in the reality for me, I do, right? I wanted to step in and provide that support at the age he is, rather than it becoming a crisis and something needed to happen, right? That to me would have been a bigger disruption into his life and to my life, in that I thought, if it's just part of my life, that's just what it is. Like I said, we do things together. He sometimes would prefer I not stop by his apartment because he doesn't want to see me, So we have movie dates and we do things, and he is just part of my life. And so it has been, gratefully, a very good transition so far.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that things have worked out smoothly. I know it definitely has had its ups and downs, but just having a sister like you and a sibling who's involved is so helpful. And it really, every family is different, and the degree that siblings step in and take on those caregiver roles really vary. So parents who are listening might just be thinking about that for down the road of when they're planning for those future stages of whether there might be another guardian in the picture to consider appointing or what those next steps will be. That also ties into that whole life course planning process.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, the life course, Indiana is one of the states that has embraced the life course philosophy, and maybe that's something you can add to your website underneath there as well. That definitely talks about this, right? Making sure that we're looking at all stages and all life domains, from everything from employment to community living to safety and security of an individual to healthy living to that spirituality or the social aspects, and then citizenship and advocacy. So how do we make sure that all of those facets of someone's life are included and tended to and helped foster where that individual wants to be in those areas?
Yeah, that's so true. With safety and security that you were just referring to, are there any initiatives in place or maybe working with police or other departments in order to focus on some of those issues?
Yeah, we have some pockets that we have worked with some police departments on helping them understand the more kind of specifics of our services and what does that mean, and what are, maybe they receive specific calls to certain residents, and helping them understand maybe how to react to that. I also think, safety and security also comes down to helping families understand what kind of guardianship options are out there as well. We don't necessarily, DDRS doesn't house a guardianship kind of program. However, you hear a lot about supported decision-making and making sure that families are making decisions about guardianship that makes the most sense for their individual, right? And making sure that people see the spectrum. It's not guardianship or no guardianship. There's guardianship. There's limited guardianship. There's a power of attorney. There's maybe you have a joint bank account, and maybe utilizing, again, those supported decision-making opportunities. And so when you do talk about that safety and security, I know probably a lot of moms and dads out there, it's sometimes that biggest barrier, ripping off that Band-Aid. For my personal side of things, we've utilized that app that we are able to kind of track each other, so that I know that it also kind of alerts me when he goes back to his apartment, or alerts me when he gets to work, so that I have that, that is a sense of security that he has agreed to, and that he also really likes as well. So there are ways in which people have obviously various needs, and I don't want to overly simplify maybe other individuals' health and safety needs, but I would encourage families to kind of think outside the box of what makes the most sense for that individual, and not just do what they feel so that they know that their person is safe. Kind of goes back to that dignity of risk.
It sounds like there's been a lot of transitions going on in the past couple of years for you, both personally and professionally, but that they really intertwine. So could you tell us a bit about the division and maybe how it's laid out for our audience so they can get an idea of some of your responsibilities and what you're working with and how that in turn impacts families?
Absolutely. It's a great question and a smart one to ask, as far as all states are made up a little differently. So in Indiana, we have, under the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, we have 4 bureaus, and each of those bureaus help implement certain state and federal programs. And so one of the bureaus we have is the Bureau of Child Development. It houses Indiana's early intervention program, which is called First Steps in Indiana. And that serves individuals that have a potential developmental disability or other kind of special health care need from 0 to age 3. And then we have the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services, which houses the Medicaid home and community-based services waivers for those individuals that happen to have an intellectual or developmental disability. And then we have the Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, which houses vocational rehabilitation, which really is, right, the core there is to help individuals with varying types of disabilities go and obtain employment or maintain their employment. We also house the blind and visually impaired services, deaf and hard of hearing services, as well as the independent living services. And then lastly, there's a Bureau of Quality Improvement, but that really focuses more on the kind of provider relations and health and safety and data for the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services.
Wow, okay. So lots of different things going on. And so you are primarily supervising all of those different bureaus then?
Yep, as the division director, and we have a great team here in Indiana. As the division director, we have the ability to kind of have this umbrella approach to disability services. And we try our best to also make sure that we appropriately coordinate and partner with other agencies or divisions or local communities so they, one, either understand how to utilize our services or how we can educate and help individuals in the other agencies and communities to do that as well, support individuals with disabilities. So what's one nice thing, as I indicated, we have kind of like that birth until individuals are old, and we have that life stages by which we are looking at how we best design service options or support options or just information and referral options for families and individuals with disabilities.
Oh, that's great, really taking that lifespan perspective. So the podcast here, typically we tailor to families and professionals who are providing care for teens and adults. So I'm curious if maybe you could share some insights into the services that you develop for those who are transitioning into adulthood or those who are already in adult services, and if there are certain initiatives underway or new innovations that are currently happening in Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably not new to Indiana. It's obviously more of a national kind of change in law and regulations, but we are in the process of making sure we're compliant or, implementing with spirit and intent what's called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, which has the impact primarily on the program called Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And it really acts as a workforce initiative for all of the state of Indiana. But one key component of that is called pre-employment transition services. And those services are really intended to have a refocus and a proactive approach, if you will, on individuals that have a disability, including those individuals with autism that need some assistance between, before they graduate their high school. Mm-hmm. So allowing them to allowing those agencies and stakeholders to make sure that we allocate not only funding, but also quality programming to ensure that they get some of that work-based learning, self-advocacy options, so that the career counseling, so they have some ability to kind of have some foresight to have an expectation of what they need to obtain employment. So that's one kind of key initiative that isn't specific to Indiana, but one in which is a national perspective is happening in all states. We also have the home and community-based waivers. Mm-hmm. Individuals can select to sign up for the waiver if they have an intellectual or developmental disability. And on those waivers, at least how they are designed in Indiana, there are also some options of services that I would think would be very beneficial to individuals on the autism spectrum to live an independent life, to seek assistance that they feel like is necessary so that they can gain access appropriately to the community. And then I always want to make sure that those connections from a state and kind of the disability organizations and family organizations are strong. And so not only are there services and supports that the state have, but I think it's always important to ensure that those relationships and that information, as well as building upon the strengths of the individuals that they have, so that we can identify what the best strategies are to create what I could call and what this good life for individuals with disabilities.
That's great. So we talked so far about some pre-employment types of services that you're really spearheading. So some initiatives on that are also going nationwide right now. And then the home and community-based services. So for individuals who are in adulthood right now, are there, so maybe for those who are currently living at home with their parents, what kinds of housing options are there for them right now?
Sure. So I think that all depends on obviously various factors. And it's one in which I think, I come from a sibling perspective, which is different than a mother perspective, right? I think siblings are a little more eager to maybe push the line a little further so that they can, jump over that.
Yeah, I'd agree.
There are traditional housing options. I would love to work more with some of the housing authorities in Indiana as well as local resources to ensure that their families are aware of options, as well as, there's a lot of great providers who provide services that have a lot of those options too. I think we want to make sure that families are very planful in that, right? Even, they talk about that transition age of coming out of school, right? And I think everyone is very focused, as they should be, on, what's kind of the outcome of school, right? Are we getting a diploma? Where are they going after school? Are they going to college or not college? And what type of job? And I think the housing stuff needs to be in there too. And it's not just about finding the place to live, but it's about the activities that you do in having a house, right? It's cleaning, it's doing laundry, it's cooking, it's all of those, obviously life skills, quote unquote life skills, to get that accomplished. And I think if I can throw in some things about technology, I think technology is an awesome option that will continuously grow and provide, I think, some various outlets to make individuals more independent that just happen to have disabilities. Speaking from a sibling perspective again, who I do a lot of work with my brother working on these things. So things like utilizing ride-sharing apps like Uber or Lyft. Uh-huh. He doesn't drive, right? So allowing him to utilize that, teaching him how to utilize that. Things as simple as a tip calculator. He's not the best with money, and putting that on his app and showing him how to do that, he can independently go out to a restaurant that you sit down and you're not just, it's not just a fast food. He's able to kind of put in the tip. Things that we also do, him and I have a mutual agreement that we use an app that's kind of tracks where you are, so that he can see where I am and I can see where he is at any point in time. And in some ways that makes me, oh, yes, he made it to work. Everything's good. Those types of things. It helps maybe with that health and safety, that fear that sometimes families have. But it gives him, also the ability to say, hey, I'm not too far from where my sister is located. I can call her, or I need some help to do that. Another thing that we've utilized a lot with technology is even like FaceTime with a smartphone, being able to pick that up and check on something. If, something cooking, like, I'm not sure if this is done, or I'm not sure if, is this moldy or not? He's able to utilize that to show me, instead of driving down or sending in some instances, a staff person to look at that. So I think technology has some great improvements and options for those individuals who happen to be on the autism spectrum as well.
Yeah, that's great.
That can be very beneficial to make them independent to whatever is appropriate for them.
Totally. Yeah, so you mentioned apps such as Uber and Lyft for transportation. So I was curious if there are any kind of plans in the works to develop transportation options further for individuals with disabilities, and including those on the spectrum.
Yes, I would love that. Yeah, it is one of those common things. You go out and you talk to families, you talk to, individuals with disabilities, and transportation is a huge barrier still. Mm-hmm. Even if you're in an urban area, sometimes you don't have that option. And I love the opportunities. I think that even local communities are kind of listening and kind of understanding who are the people in our community, right? Those are people that happen to have disabilities, elderly individuals who don't drive anymore. There are people with various types of barriers that need sometimes these types of, services like transportation. And so those are those things that, creating, I think, always in a separate parallel universe of transportation for people with disabilities isn't always the best idea. But those are those areas that I would love to collaborate with the state and local communities to make sure that what are those available options that we have, and how do we make sure more underneath that kind of universal design idea and principles of how are we designing our community to ensure that access is there for everyone.
Yeah.
And how it would benefit that community by, right? We have transportation. This person now has a job or a more sustainable job because they can get back and forth to their job.
Exactly. It really makes or breaks what they're able to do and where they can go.
I think there's some creative things that, other states are also working on. I wouldn't say we're not working on it in a division specific, right? How some waiver services provide transportation, vocational rehab in some instances help assist with transportation until they get the job.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
that more holistic thing, that really comes from those communities, I think, in making sure they develop what they think is necessary for them. And that's why I think it's important, again, to going back to that community integration, home and community-based settings, right? Making sure that the communities know that there's individuals with disabilities there and they have needs that are a lot of times no different than a variety of people's needs in those communities.
Right. Yeah, so really ensuring that some of these things are being discussed at a more local level, and then you and the divisions will be there to foster those conversations and to hopefully support them in their efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering, are there certain questions that families may come to you or the Division of Voc Rehab in particular, so the Bureau of Rehabilitation, thinking that some members of our audience might be interested in connecting with Voc Rehab if they haven't already or are searching for more employment options? Do you have any recommendations or thoughts about the best way to utilize those systems?
If you are an Indiana listener, you're welcome to go to the website. It's vrs.in.gov, and you're welcome to check out our website regarding vocational rehabilitation services. My advice on jobs, if you will, and employment is, I think will always be a changing landscape of expectations of jobs and employment for individuals with disabilities. I think the landscape of expectation for that 3-year-old that is coming into our system or our school system, and the expectation of, the 67-year-old that happens to have a disability, right? That is very different. The culture when that 67-year-old was 3 looked very different than the 3-year-old in 2017. And that's very positive because that's in some ways a great demonstration of a civil rights movement for an underserved population or ability for them to move forward. And so vocational rehabilitation is absolutely a service that can be employed to kind of help employ, no pun intended there, but can assist them to be successful. There are also a multitude of other workforce options through Indiana's Department of Workforce Development or through youth programs at the school or through just ability to volunteer and ability to have some transition services through the school system. And so I think making sure that kind of those families and individuals feel empowered, that they know that, let's say they're in 5th grade, they know that they want to create their life so that they have a part-time or full-time job and maybe this career path, and that the families and teachers and any other type of support that this family has can really kind of focus in and hone in what are those activities that we need to continuously do to make sure that that option can become the reality. And I know it's always easier said than done, but to be really proactive in planning and not waiting until they graduate and say, okay, now they graduated, now what's the job going to be, right? We don't do that really with any other student. We're very planful in moving forward. I think we need to make sure we afford that same opportunity to individuals that have disabilities or are on the autism spectrum, because, we're losing a lot of great talent sometimes because of those low expectations or the inability to appropriately figure out how to accommodate or make a modification for someone so that they can be successful.
Exactly, yeah. There really are so many ways that they can get involved, whether it be through volunteer positions or paid employment, and then they can definitely succeed and do well in those positions.
Absolutely.
So in thinking about planning and moving along in the lifespan, so as these individuals with autism move into adulthood and caregivers might need to be planning for their futures, thinking financially, or in terms of what will happen when they're no longer around. Are there any resources that you currently provide or would recommend families turn to for those specific issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. In talking about kind of financial planning, and I don't want anyone to take away anything and making these broad sweeping generalizations, but no, financial planning is important. I know in Indiana, the ARC of Indiana has the ARC Master Trust that I think individuals and families can kind of contact them and get information on the possibilities of how maybe that resources could support them. Listeners probably have heard of the ABLE Act as another financial planning opportunity to help individuals that happen to have disabilities and planning, being more planful of their future and what kind of things they need to accomplish their goals. So I think without going into too many details, I think those are the two things that kind of come off the top of my head as to maybe some good options for individuals. And I think it kind of goes back to our job conversation, having the expectation to go to work, kind of that employment first understanding and philosophy to ensure that, we can empower individuals, we can help train, we can help provide some vocational assistance to really make sure individuals have a job so then they also have some financial stability for themselves as well.
Oh, great. Thanks, Kylee, for sharing some of those resources. So, Kylee, would you mind filling us in on a bit more about your life as director of DDRS? So, what does that look like exactly?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question. What does that look like? It changes day to day. Some days I'm very heavily involved in one particular bureau and not another bureau. It changes. I think I'm in a lot of meetings. I talk a lot. I listen a lot. While I wish I could do more, I love getting out into the state. I love hearing from families. There's lots of services that are very helpful and provide support. And I'm not naive to that there are some issues with services in general, and that I like to hear from individuals that come forth with, hey, did you notice this? Or did you have, this is, not really working. Have you thought about doing this? Or here's maybe a potential solution. And while nothing gets changed quickly, I think those are those things that I file away in my head or actually in a file drawer and kind of come back to when those things become timely and relevant to kind of make either system changes or policy changes that I think maybe is best for Hoosiers that happen to have disabilities in our state. I have definitely a focus. As you indicated, I come to this position with a very personal side of it. So I often wear, I feel like sometimes two hats, the professional state official, and then sometimes I put my personal sibling hat on. I sit through many of the case management meetings with my brother. I attended his vocational rehabilitation meetings as well. So I also see the service delivery actually implemented. It's been interesting. I like the work. I feel very privileged to be here. I feel like it's a huge responsibility as well. And it's sometimes frustrating. It's sometimes frustrating that things move slow and that I'm very methodical. I like to think about things and try to anticipate any unintended consequences that may occur. But I do come at it with a very kind of a heart, and that I truly want to see the services used that we provide to the benefit of those families and those individuals. If that happens, I feel like we've done a good job. If that also provides arm of educating other state officials or educating legislators or educating other agencies or educating, people who have no connection to the field of disability or the world of disability. I love providing some success stories or those types of things that paint a picture of just the awesome work that we do and the awesome work that families do to make sure that their child or the individual in their self-advocacy work to really make the life that they want them to live.
I love that. Yeah. Now, it really sounds like you're the perfect fit for this position, just given all the perspective that you have, being a sibling yourself and understanding the methodical nature of what it's like to work in government and interacting with folks across the state, stakeholders. It sounds like you're really doing a great job at filling the whole picture.
Well, thank you. Yeah, sometimes I feel like that, and other days, it's sometimes a struggle. But
Sure.
At the end of the day, go back and try to reflect of, I'm here for the right reasons. So.
Mm-hmm. You definitely are. How long have you been in this position now?
For this particular position as the division director, I've been in the role for about a year. Actually, a year.
All right. So let's see if individuals or members of our audience would like to reach out more to DDRS or potentially even contact with you. Are you open to any personal communication from our audience, or would you send them to specific channels to learn more?
Yeah, I'm open to both. Individuals are welcome to contact me. You can find my contact information on what's called the DDRS website. You could go to www.ddrs.in.gov, and that gives you kind of an overview of all the services we provide, as well as the Bureau directors. You can find us on social media. The Bureau of Developmental Disability Services, as well as Vocational Rehabilitation Services in Indiana, has a Facebook page as well as a Twitter page. So that would maybe be another opportunity for people to connect.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So do you have any parting piece of guidance or advice for families who are providing care for individuals with autism who are about to move into adulthood? What would you tell them?
Sure. So I think it's hugely important that while sometimes it's a difficult transition, but it's critical to make sure you keep those high expectations. I think it's critical to make sure that individuals that are on the autism spectrum have the same rights as everyone else, and that we can really derive through services, through support, through the quote-unquote natural supports, to make sure that we can provide the right trajectory for those individuals as they go into adulthood. I think technology, I've talked about that before, but I think it just opens the door to maybe so many opportunities that in the past were closed. And I think as you think about that, it will continue to grow. We talked about transportation, and I joke sometimes, but, the self-driving car exists somewhere, right?
They do. They're coming.
So you never know where that could go, right? So it's those types of things that I never want families or individuals to close the door because they failed once, right? Mm-hmm. Failing is part of life, and failing is part of adulthood. And that so many times I hear from families that said, oh, he had a job and, it didn't work out, so we just didn't try anymore, right? Well, how many times I've definitely failed at jobs. My friends have failed at jobs. So how do you make sure that you continue on in the direction and you continue to make sure that there are supports in place to do that, knowing along the line that there will be failures and that's okay. And in fact, expect failures, because that's sometimes what life is. But I think making sure that they have that ability of that dignity of risk to fail in a safe environment that they feel that they can learn from, to make sure that we focus on people's strengths, to make sure we really kind of have a more holistic approach of what someone needs. It's not just, behavior services. Maybe there are assistive technology services. Maybe there are, make sure we focus on their personal strengths and assets. Making sure that individuals have the informed choice. It is their life. It is what they want to do. And how can we make sure that they have that informed choice? I guess that would be maybe my takeaway, is that don't ever discount the successes that individuals can have, even if there are failures along the way.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Kylee. I really enjoyed getting to know you better and learning more about your family perspective, as well as some of the work that you're doing at the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services.
Well, it's been very fun, and I hope the information shared is helpful. Thank you for doing the podcast.
Hey, Quality of Lifers. Thanks so much for joining Kylee and me for today's interview. To learn more about the resources and information that was shared on today's episode, please visit Kylie's show notes page at www.autismqualityoflife.com. If you've been enjoying listening to these episodes, please give us a rating or a review on iTunes so that we can be visible to an even broader audience of potential listeners. Okay, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.